Story 1.
I've been working near the Chernobyl exclusion zone for years now. It's a job that doesn't ask questions, and frankly, neither do I. But this one's different. A group of hikers went missing a few weeks ago, and no one's heard from them since. The higher-ups want me to find them. I'm not the type to second-guess orders, but something's off. They vanished into the zone, and I can't shake the feeling that it's not just a case of bad luck or radio silence. The first sign that things weren't right came when I found their trail. It was fresh, barely a week old. But then, there was this weird symbol scratched into the bark of a tree, nothing I've ever seen before. It didn't look like anything natural, no animal marks, no random scratch. It was deliberate. Like someone or something had been marking the path for a reason. I thought it might be just some strange coincidence, but as I moved deeper into the forest, the symbols kept showing up, each more intricate and disturbing than the last. By the time I found the second symbol, I knew I wasn't alone. You can't explain it, really. It's like a sixth sense, that feeling in the back of your neck, the one you get when you know someone's watching you. At first, I blamed the wind or the trees creaking, but the longer I stood there, the more it felt like something was following me. I tried to ignore it, but the unease gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the thought, these people hadn't just gotten lost. They were dragged into something much worse. I kept moving, because that's what you do. You don't stop. The deeper I got into the forest, the thicker the air felt, almost like the trees were closing in on me. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind felt like someone was right behind me. My gear was heavy, but the sweat on my back had nothing to do with the pack. There was something else, something in the air that didn't belong. I came across a campfire site, their campfire. Or what was left of it. The ashes were cold, but they had clearly been used recently. The weird part was, there was no sign of the hikers. No equipment left behind. Just the fire and the dirt, untouched. That's when I found the third mark. A symbol, carved into the ground this time. It looked almost like a spiral, but it was off, distorted. The hairs on my neck stood up as I realized that this wasn't just some lost group. They were leaving a trail for something. And that something was still out there. The wind picked up then, rattling through the trees like whispers. I swear I could hear voices, faint but clear, voices that weren't mine. I spun around, rifle ready, but the forest was empty. Just the trees, the symbols, and the feeling that I was being herded, pushed further into the heart of whatever this was. The whispers continued, growing louder, and I realized they weren't speaking in any language I recognized. But I could feel it, there was something calling to me. Something I couldn't see. As I moved deeper into the woods, I started to see them, shapes in the shadows, flickers in the corners of my eyes. They weren't human, but they weren't animals either. Just figures. Tall, slender, and constantly shifting. Every time I tried to get a clear look, they were gone, like smoke in the wind. But I knew they were there. Watching. Waiting. It was like the whole forest had come alive, and it wasn't welcoming me. It was hunting me. Then, I found something I wasn't prepared for. A body. Or what was left of it. It wasn't the hikers, no, this wasn't one of them. But it wasn't just a dead animal either. It was twisted. The body was contorted, limbs at impossible angles, and the skin was stretched so tight, it looked like it was about to tear open. And its eyes, those damn eyes, were wide open, staring directly at me. Frozen in fear. I had to turn away before I lost my lunch. I knew this wasn't just the zone. This was something else. Something older. Something worse. I didn't want to stay, but I had no choice. The trail led me farther, into a place I didn't recognize. The trees were different here, twisted, gnarled, like they had been standing here for centuries. The air was thick, and the whispers had turned into a low hum that vibrated in my chest. I could hear them now, clearer than ever, voices in the wind, not just calling out but laughing, mocking me. I thought I saw a figure in the distance, a person, standing motionless in the snow. But when I blinked, they were gone. I was close now. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. It felt like I was moving through time itself. The trees, the ground, they didn't look real. It was like stepping into a painting, an old, decaying picture, where nothing made sense and everything was warped. I found the remnants of a tent, shredded and torn, like something had torn through it with unimaginable force. The backpack nearby was open, its contents spilled out across the snow. But it wasn't the gear that caught my eye. It was the note, torn and half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, my hands shaking. The writing was frantic, smeared, like the person who wrote it had been in a hurry, desperate. It said, "They are coming. They are already here. Don't follow the marks. The trees, they watch." My heart sank as I realized what I had to do. I couldn't keep going. The group hadn't disappeared. They'd been taken. Taken by whatever was out there, whatever had been leaving those symbols, leading me deeper into the heart of this nightmare. I turned to leave, but the forest had other plans. The trees seemed to close in around me. I couldn't hear the wind anymore. It was silent, too silent. And then the whispers started again, louder, more frantic. There were more of them now, more figures, moving between the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I ran. I didn't stop. But the whispers followed, always just behind me, growing louder, until I could hear nothing else. I didn't know how long I'd been running, but by the time I stopped, my legs felt like jelly. I was in the middle of the forest, disoriented, and completely lost. The trees around me were twisting in unnatural angles, their bark blackened and scorched. The snow was thick, clinging to everything, even my clothes. I thought I was safe. But I wasn't. I wasn't anywhere near safety. I looked up, and that's when I saw them. The figures were back, standing in a circle around me. They were tall, too tall, and their eyes burned with that same unnatural glow. They weren't human. Not anymore. Their faces were blank slates, pale, stretched, like their skin didn't fit right. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My feet wouldn't budge. It felt like the ground was holding me in place, rooting me to the spot. One of the figures stepped forward, closer now. I could see its mouth, twisted into something that might have been a grin, or a sneer. It reached out a long, bony finger, pointing straight at me. I tried to speak, to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. The figure's mouth opened, and I could hear it now, clearer than ever, the whisper that had followed me since the beginning. "You should have turned back. Now, you belong to us." I thought I was going to die right there. I thought the forest was going to swallow me whole. But then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The figures melted back into the trees, their eyes disappearing into the darkness. I couldn't move. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out. I turned and ran again, this time without looking back. Hours passed. Days, maybe. Time felt warped in the zone. My body was shaking from exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. The whispers were gone, but I could still feel them. The forest, though, it had quieted. Everything was still. Too still. I finally made my way to the edge of the zone, where the trees parted and the landscape opened up. The familiar ruins of the abandoned buildings were in the distance. But when I reached the fence, I realized something. I wasn't alone. Standing just behind the gate was a man. His face was pale, almost sickly. His eyes were wide open, staring directly at me. He was one of them, the hikers, I realized. But he wasn't the same. He wasn't alive. And I could see it now. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. His lips were cracked, dry, and I could hear the faintest whisper in my head. "You are not free." I backed away, my heart pounding. There was no way I could go back into the zone, not after everything I had seen. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence, like it was part of the wind itself. I ran. I didn't look back. I had to get out. The sun was setting, and the landscape grew darker, but I couldn't stop. I just kept running, faster and faster, until I hit the main road. It took hours to find my way to the nearest town. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for me to turn around. I found a place to crash, exhausted, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hikers, sick, twisted, standing just outside my window. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I made my way back to the city. But the memories, the symbols, the whispers, they stayed with me. I knew it wasn't over. The zone hadn't let go of me. It never would. And the worst part was, I knew I wasn't the only one. There were others, lost souls, out there, and I had seen their faces. I knew that, sooner or later, I'd be one of them too. Part of the forest. Part of the whispers. Forever. I tried to move on, you know? I tried to put it all behind me, but it doesn't work like that. The dreams started. Not every night, but often enough to make me lose sleep. I would wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, feeling like I was still out there, in that cursed forest. The whispers would come, soft at first, then louder, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing them in my head or outside. And then there was the figure, the one who had been standing by the fence. I couldn't forget his face, those eyes. And it was like he had followed me. It started with small things, shadows out of place, doors creaking open on their own. I could swear I felt someone standing behind me, just out of my reach. Then, I began to notice things I couldn't explain, things that shouldn't have been there. I found a mark, carved into the wood of my apartment door. It wasn't deep, just a light scratch, but it was the same symbol I had seen in the forest. The same one I had tried to forget. My stomach dropped. It was happening again. The zone, whatever it was, wasn't done with me. I thought I was free. But now I knew the truth. You can't leave. Not once you've seen it. Not once you've been marked. The hallucinations started soon after the mark appeared. At first, they were just fleeting glimpses, figures moving in the corner of my eye, whispers in the dead of night. But soon, they became more persistent. I couldn't trust my own mind. I'd wake up to find scratches on my arms, dirt under my nails, dirt that didn't come from anywhere inside the city. It felt like I was still out there, in the zone, like I was slipping between the real world and the nightmare that waited for me. I tried going to the police, but they didn't believe me. They said I was stressed, hallucinating. But they couldn't explain the marks on my door, or the strange, distorted symbols that were appearing everywhere I went. They couldn't explain why, when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone else, someone with pale skin and wide, terrified eyes staring back at me. I was losing my grip on reality. The more I fought it, the more I felt myself slipping into whatever it was that had claimed the others. I couldn't get away. The zone had found me. And I realized, too late, that I would never escape it. I don't know how much longer I've got. The whispers are louder now, and I can hear them even when I'm awake. Sometimes, I wake up and I'm not sure where I am, my apartment or the forest. The figures are always there, standing just outside, watching through the window. The symbols keep appearing, etched into every surface. The zone is closing in, piece by piece. I've tried everything, leaving town, moving to a new place, but it follows me. The forest, the whispers, the faces. It doesn't let you go. You can't escape once you've seen it, once you've been marked. Maybe you think this is all just a bad dream, some nightmare that'll fade when I wake up. But it's not. I'm still here. And one day, I'll join the others. I'll disappear into the forest, lost in the trees, marked and claimed by whatever it is that watches from the shadows. And then, someone else will come looking for me.
Story 2.
I don't know how I ended up with that map. You know how it is, every stalker wants to find something new, a hidden path, a secret route. We all chase after those rumors of untouched territory, thinking there's some treasure waiting, or just a place no one has dared to step into for years. But this time, this map wasn't like the others. It started with a line, thin, almost invisible, running through the center of the zone. The kind of line that didn't exist on any of the other maps. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another forgotten trail. But as I traced it with my finger, something about it felt wrong. The more I stared at it, the more it felt like it was pulling me in. Like I was meant to follow it. I packed up my gear and set off the next morning. It was just another day in the zone, or so I thought. The sun was barely up, and the air had that heavy, still feeling. Like something was waiting for me. I knew the risks, of course. The zone doesn't care about your plans. But this place, this line, it called to me. I had to see what was at the end. By midday, the path grew more twisted. I'd passed familiar landmarks, but they felt wrong, warped. The trees were taller, the air thicker, like something was smothering me. And that's when I saw them, the first of them. Shadows. Moving, but not quite walking. They were there, and then they were gone. Figures that were too still, too unnatural to be human, yet too shaped like people to be anything else. I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath hitched. I'd seen things in the zone, mutants, radiation anomalies, but this felt different. These weren't creatures. These were remnants. They had once been people, but not anymore. They shuffled, their movements jerky and disjointed, their eyes too vacant. I don't know how long I stood there, but the sound of their quiet steps grew louder. Closer. It hit me then. The line on the map, it didn't just lead me to a place. It led me to a graveyard. A place where the dead didn't stay dead. They were moving, shifting, looking for something, or someone. I realized I wasn't just a curious stalker anymore. I was their target. I tried to turn back, but the path behind me was already obscured. The trees had closed in, the wind whispered in a language I couldn't understand, and the shadows, those damned shadows, kept following me. They moved as if they were just waiting for me to slip, to make a mistake. And I knew if I did, they'd have me. That's when I heard it. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakably human. I didn't want to look, didn't want to hear it, but but I couldn't help myself. I turned around, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing there, someone alive. But then their face came into view, hollow, pale, their mouth twisted in a silent scream. No. This wasn't someone alive. This was one of them. I felt a chill down my spine. The thing, or whatever it was, stepped forward. It didn't walk like a person. It glided, floating just above the ground. And as it got closer, I saw the truth of it. This was no wandering corpse. This was something else, something worse. I knew I had to move, had to get out, but the air was too thick, too heavy. Every step felt like I was sinking deeper into their world, into their territory. I ran. I don't know how far or how fast, but I kept moving. The shadows followed, their feet scraping against the earth with every step. I could hear them now, whispers, voices, not quite human. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was more of them. Some of them weren't just walking. They were crawling on all fours, dragging their limbs as they came closer. At some point, I lost track of time. There was only the sound of my breath, my footsteps, and those behind me. I could feel the pressure building, like I was suffocating, like I was being drawn into a place where nothing was real anymore. I tried to shout, to scream for help, but my voice was lost in the thick, oppressive air. I stumbled, my legs giving out. When I hit the ground, I thought I heard a laugh, a hollow, empty laugh that sent a shiver up my spine. I looked up, expecting the worst, but then the world shifted. Everything around me was blurry, twisted, out of focus. I didn't know where I was anymore, if I was even still in the zone. It felt like I was in a different world, one where the dead walked and the living, well, they didn't stand a chance. When I woke up, I was lying in a clearing. I don't remember how I got there. My head throbbed, my body felt like it had been run over by a truck. And that's when I realized everything was wrong. The shadows had stopped following me, but the air was colder. The trees, they looked different now. They were too still, like the world was holding its breath. I tried to get up, but my legs were stiff, as if they hadn't moved in days. My gear was scattered around me, but it was all wrong. The map was missing. I had it before. I had it in my hand when I fell. It was gone now, and with it, any hope of getting out. But worse than that was the sense of dread creeping in. I wasn't alone. They were close. I could feel them. I could hear their shuffling, their breathing, the sound of something being dragged across the ground. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to look. But I had no choice. They were already there, standing at the edge of the clearing, their pale faces staring at me, their eyes empty of life, yet full of hunger. The first one came forward. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. I could see the tattered clothes, the skin stretched tight over bones, and the twisted face, frozen in an expression of agony. It stopped a few feet from me, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. Its eyes locked with mine, and for a second, I thought I saw something human in them. But it was gone just as quickly as it had come. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work, my arms wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place, caught between the living and the dead. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in a voice, deep and guttural, like something was crawling up from the depths of the earth. Join us. I couldn't understand what it meant. I didn't want to. But the others were moving now, circling around me, their eyes fixed on me. I could feel their cold, clammy hands reaching for me, but I couldn't pull away. It was as if the very air was holding me in place, forcing me to face whatever nightmare I had wandered into. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in their grip. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, but there was no escape. The more I struggled, the more they tightened their hold. They didn't speak again, but the silence was deafening, filling the air with a sense of inevitability. I knew I was going to join them, become one of them, one of the walking dead, cursed to wander forever in this twisted version of the zone. But then, just as I was about to lose all hope, I saw something in the distance. A flicker of movement. A shadow moving through the trees. Someone was coming. I didn't know who or what they were, but they were getting closer. The creatures, those twisted remnants of humanity, paused. Their eyes shifted, looking toward the movement. In that brief moment of distraction, I gathered whatever strength I had left and bolted. I didn't know where I was running, but I didn't care. I just had to move. Away from them, away from whatever this place had become. I ran for what felt like hours. The trees seemed to close in on me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every time I thought I heard their footsteps behind me, I pushed harder, my legs screaming in protest. I didn't know where the path was leading, but it didn't matter. I just had to get away. Eventually, I stumbled across a familiar landmark, one I recognized. A half-buried rock, something I had seen before. I knew I was close to the exit. I was almost free. But then, I heard it. A voice, soft and faint, like a whisper on the wind. "You can't leave." It was the same voice I had heard earlier, but this time, it wasn't from one of them. It was from something deeper, something older. Something that had been watching me all along. I froze. I didn't dare turn around. The zone had a way of twisting your thoughts, your fears. And now, it had me. I don't know what happened next. My memory is patchy, like pieces of a broken puzzle that don't fit together. All I know is that I woke up in a different place, somewhere far from where I had been. The sky was gray, and the air was thick with fog. The trees were twisted, their branches reaching out like claws. The creatures were gone, but I could still feel them. Their presence was everywhere, in the shadows, in the silence. They hadn't left. They were waiting for me to make a mistake, to slip up. And they would be there, ready to drag me back into the darkness. I tried to leave, tried to find my way out, but the map was gone. There was no way back. The zone had claimed me, and now I was just another lost soul, wandering in the dark, waiting for my turn to join the others. I didn't want to, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for me again. I don't know how much longer I'll last. Every time I close my eyes, I hear their whispers. Every time I turn a corner, I feel their eyes on me. I'm being hunted, but not by something I can fight. No, these aren't creatures you can kill. There's something worse. Something older. Something that doesn't want to kill you. It wants to make you like them. I've seen it in their eyes. The emptiness. The hunger. And I know, deep down, that one day, I'll stop running. One day, I'll turn around, and they'll be there, ready to take me. And when that happens, I'll join them. One of the dead, forever walking in the zone, waiting for the next fool to wander into their trap. If you're ever out there, don't go looking for this place. Don't follow the line. Trust me. Once you're marked, you can never escape.
Story 3.
You know, sometimes curiosity gets the best of us. I'd heard all the stories, told by guys who've been around the zone long enough to have seen things. things that made their voices shake and their hands twitch. The lake was one of those places, a spot that's been avoided for years. They say the water never freezes, no matter how cold it gets, and that's strange enough to make anyone turn away. But something about it called to me. I didn't believe in ghost stories, and I thought it was just another haunted spot that everyone overhyped. But when I saw those tracks leading toward the lake, I couldn't resist. The prints weren't from any animal I knew. Too big, too deep. The zone's full of surprises, sure, but these tracks, they felt different. Something wasn't right. So, without a second thought, I packed up, grabbed my gear, and headed out there. The others warned me. They said it took lives. But like I said, I'm not one to listen to rumors. The way I see it, the zone can kill you any day, anytime. Might as well go out looking for something worth finding. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. There was a kind of weight in the air, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something. The trees around the lake were all twisted and bent, their roots creeping like fingers over the land, clutching at the earth. The smell in the air was thick, like wet moss, but with something else mixed in, something metallic. And then, I saw it. The lake. Dead still. No ripples, no movement. Just a dark mirror stretching out in front of me. I set up camp a few hundred meters away from the shore. Didn't want to get too close at first. It wasn't just the legends that made me hesitate, it was the feeling that I was being watched. You ever get that? Like someone's just behind you, breathing down your neck, but when you turn around, there's nothing? Yeah, I had that feeling. Every step I took felt heavier, like the ground beneath me was holding me back. But still, the curiosity, it pushed me forward. It was late in the evening when I finally decided to move closer to the water. The air was colder now, but the sun had only just dipped below the horizon. As I crept closer, I noticed something odd. There were ripples on the surface of the lake. But they didn't make sense. They didn't come from the wind or anything above the surface. No, this was deeper, coming from far below. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. That's when I heard it, something moving under the water. It was slow at first, like it was trying to get closer without being noticed. But the sound, the way it shifted and swirled, it wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't just a ripple either. It was almost like something was alive down there, something big. Something that could sense my presence. I should have turned around then, packed up, and left. But that damn curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I was too close now to back off. Something told me I was about to discover something that I shouldn't. The water began to move in violent circles, the surface frothing like it was boiling. My heart pounded in my chest. I was about to pull away when I saw something break the surface, a shape, long and twisted. I couldn't make out its details, but I knew it wasn't anything natural. It was moving, shifting in ways that no creature should. It was like it was adapting to the water, becoming one with it, blending in and out of the surface, its form almost liquid. I stepped back, instinct kicking in. That's when I realized, whatever it was, it had been waiting for me. The moment I stepped near the water, the thing had known. It had sensed my presence. And now, it was coming. A low, guttural noise echoed across the lake, something between a growl and a hiss. It was like it was calling to something, or someone. Something worse, maybe. Something I had no business facing. I don't know how long I stood there, my legs frozen to the ground. The water calmed for a second, like the thing below was taking a breath. Then, I heard something else, voices. Soft whispers, at first. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded almost human. No, they were human. They were begging, pleading for help. But the thing in the water was getting closer, and with it, the whispers grew louder. I could feel my skin crawl, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The voices weren't just coming from the water anymore. They were coming from all around me, from the trees, from the ground. It was like the whole place was alive with them, drowning in their pain. I started to back away, my breath coming faster, panic setting in. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't escape them. They were everywhere now, closing in. I turned, ready to run, but the ground shifted beneath my feet, and I stumbled, barely catching myself. By the time I regained my balance, the thing in the water was no longer hiding. It was there, right in front of me, its twisted form rising from the lake like a nightmare come to life. It was a mass of limbs, something that might have once been human, but now it was something else, something unrecognizable. I didn't have time to think, only to run. But as I turned, I felt something brush my leg, cold and wet, pulling at me, trying to drag me back. I kicked out, scrambling away from the water's edge, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were still there, louder now, like they were coming from inside my skull. The thing in the lake was reaching for me, its limbs stretching, pulling itself closer, its face, or what used to be its face, grinning. It wasn't even human anymore. It was a creature of hunger, of rage, and it wanted me. It needed me. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. The whispers followed me, the ground shifting and groaning beneath my feet as if it was trying to swallow me whole. The air was thick now, oppressive, like the zone was alive, closing in on me. I didn't know what I was running from. Was it the thing in the water, or something worse? I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I had to get away. My legs burned, my breath ragged, but I pushed on. The sounds of the lake were still behind me, but they were fading. For a moment, I thought I had outrun it. But as I stumbled through the trees, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The tracks. The tracks I had followed earlier, the ones that led me here, were behind me now, but they weren't my own. They were following me. The tracks weren't human. They were large, unearthly, and they moved like something had dragged itself across the ground, leaving deep impressions. I could see them now, clear in the fading light of the zone, but they didn't lead away from the lake. No, they led deeper into the woods. I could hear the whispers again, faint, but growing louder. It was like they were calling me back. Not just to the lake, but somewhere darker, somewhere worse. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. Something in my chest told me I had to follow, that I had already crossed a line I couldn't come back from. The zone had marked me. It had chosen me, and now it wanted me to pay. I tried to block the thoughts out, tried to shut everything down. But the whispers kept calling, growing in number, in strength, until they became screams. I don't know how much time had passed when I found myself back at the lake. My feet moved on their own, like they were guided by something else, something that wasn't me. The water was still. Too still. And I knew it wasn't over. The thing was still there, waiting for me. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of voices, 1,000 souls lost to the lake, all crying out for release. I couldn't run anymore. The zone had me. I had seen its secrets, and now I was part of them. The thing in the lake, it wasn't done with me. I was its next victim, its next piece in its horrible puzzle. And as I knelt by the water, I could feel it. The cold. The pull. The promise of something worse, something older. And I realized, it wasn't just the lake that wanted me. It was the zone. I don't know if I'll make it out of here. I don't even know if I'll ever make it back to my camp. The whispers are louder than ever now, swirling around me, getting closer, surrounding me. The thing in the lake, whatever it is, it's waiting for me to make the final mistake. I can feel it, the cold hands of the dead reaching for me, pulling me toward the water. I shouldn't have come. I should have listened. But now, it's too late. The zone doesn't let go of its own. And I think, deep down, I know that when I take that last step into the water, I'll never come back. No one ever does.
Story 4.
It was the usual kind of day in the zone, that oppressive quiet hanging over everything, broken only by the occasional groan of the earth or a distant, eerie howl. I'd been walking for hours, heading into a sector I didn't often visit. Somewhere deep in the heart of the zone, there was this old building, a rusted-out shack that was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I had seen it on a map once. It wasn't marked as anything significant, just a blip. Still, my gut told me there was something there. Something worth checking. Inside the shack, there was dust everywhere. Old furniture, cracked windows, and piles of forgotten equipment strewn across the floor. But there, buried under a pile of broken wires and wood, was an old radio. The thing looked ancient, like it hadn't worked in decades. I was skeptical at first. What's the point of turning it on? But the silence of the zone was gnawing at me, and a part of me just wanted some kind of connection to the outside world, even if it was only static. I plugged the radio in and flipped the switch. At first, it was exactly what I expected, crackling static, the kind of noise you hear when a device hasn't been used in forever. I was about to turn it off when I heard something odd. A voice. Faint, distant, almost like it was struggling to break through the static. At first, I thought I was just hearing things. The zone does that to you, you know? But no, there it was again. A voice. Low, distorted, but still clearly human. I leaned in closer, heart pounding. It sounded like someone was talking, but it was hard to make out the words. It was just noise at first, fragments of sentences. But then, a clearer message came through. You're not alone, they're watching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned the dial to see if I could get a better signal, but the voice seemed to grow clearer the more I listened. It felt personal, like it was speaking directly to me. The voice on the radio changed, became more urgent, more frantic. I could barely believe what I was hearing. The words were barely intelligible, but I could pick out a few fragments. Experiment, trapped, we've been watching you, it's all been planned. My stomach sank. At first, I thought it was just some random transmission, maybe a broadcast from long ago, someone picking up an old frequency. But then the voice said something I couldn't ignore. You've been part of this since the beginning. That hit me like a brick. What the hell was it talking about? I didn't have time to think about it. The radio continued. They're still watching. They'll never stop. You can't escape. The words echoed in my head as I stared at the static-filled screen. I felt trapped. Like someone, or something, had been following my every move long before I even picked up that radio. But the worst part? I started to feel like the voice knew me. Like it was talking about my past, my choices, things I'd done, things I hadn't even told anyone. It was as if the radio knew everything about me. Things I hadn't told a soul, about the people I'd lost, the mistakes I'd made, even the places I'd gone. I didn't want to believe it, but how could I ignore it? The voice grew louder now, like it was trying to push its way through the static. desperate to make me understand. You've been here before, you've been here many times. You're part of the test, part of the cycle. I stumbled back, feeling lightheaded. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The zone was bad enough, but this? I never asked for this. What do you want from me? I finally whispered to the radio, but all I heard in response was laughter. Low, guttural, the kind of laugh that sends chills crawling up your spine. Then, it spoke again. We're always watching. You never left. You never will. My heart stopped. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. What did that mean? It didn't make sense. I had been outside. I had walked the zone. But now I wasn't so sure. The more I thought about it, the more my mind twisted. Had I really been outside? Or had I been stuck here all along? I sat there, staring at the radio, the world around me becoming a blur. I couldn't focus. My head was swimming. The voice was still talking, its words now coming faster, more erratic. The experiment never ends. You think you're free, but you're just another subject. Another part of the test. We've watched you from the moment you stepped into this place. The words echoed in my ears, bouncing around in my skull. Was this some kind of game? Was I just another experiment for someone to watch? I wanted to break the radio, shut it off, stop hearing the voice. But I couldn't move. My body was frozen, like it was trapped in place. You're already dead, the voice hissed, sending a chill through my spine. And you always have been. This is all a lie, a construct. You were never supposed to leave. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the voice, but it was everywhere. It was in my head. The room felt smaller, tighter. The walls seemed to close in on me. The radio's static grew louder, and with it, the oppressive feeling that I wasn't alone in that shack. I could feel eyes on me. Not just from the radio. Something else was watching. Something that had been there all along. I couldn't escape the feeling that there were shadows moving around me, just beyond my vision. I looked around the shack, my pulse quickening, but the room was empty. Still, I could feel them. Watching. Waiting. The whispers on the radio became louder, now a chorus of voices, all speaking in unison. You've seen them too. You've felt them. The watchers. They're always there. My breathing became shallow as I frantically turned the dial, trying to get rid of the noise, trying to block it out. But no matter what I did, the voices didn't stop. They were in my head now, digging into my thoughts, twisting my memories. We never let you go. We're always watching, always observing, the voice continued. We know everything. We know what you'll do next. You can't escape the cycle. I felt my stomach churn, like I was about to be sick. Was I really stuck in some kind of experiment? Was I always a part of it? The more I thought about it, the more the walls seemed to close in, the air getting thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. The shadows were getting closer now, closing in around me. I couldn't take it anymore. The pressure, the voices, the suffocating weight of it all. I ripped the radio from the wall, throwing it across the room, watching it smash against the floor. The noise stopped. But the silence wasn't comforting. No, it was worse. It felt like the silence itself was alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I stood there, my hands shaking, heart racing. The shadows weren't gone. They were just waiting. Watching. I knew that now. The voice on the radio had been right. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I had never been. And no matter where I went, no matter how far I traveled, they would always be there. The Watchers. They were waiting for me to move, to make a mistake. And when I did, they would be there. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of the shack, to run as far away as I could. But my feet wouldn't move. I felt like I was frozen in place. The whispers returned, low and insistent, circling around me. We're always here. Always watching. You can't escape. You never will. I broke down. I could feel my sanity slipping away, like I was being torn apart from the inside. The shadows pressed in on me, their forms more defined now. I could see them moving, their shapes twisting and flickering in the corners of my vision. I could hear them whispering, their voices now clearer than ever, and each one spoke my name. Each one told me I was theirs. I had to escape. I didn't know how, but I had to. I ran. I bolted out of the shack, my feet pounding against the earth as I stumbled through the woods, the cold air rushing past me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The Watchers were still there, still following. But I ran, I kept running, until the sounds of the voices faded. At least, that's what I thought. I stopped running when I hit a clearing. My chest was tight, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked around, expecting to see the shadows, expecting to hear the voices. But there was nothing. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then, I saw it. The radio. It was sitting there in the middle of the clearing, broken, just like I left it. But something was wrong. I felt a chill run down my spine. The radio, it was still on. The voices were still coming through. And then, a single phrase came through, clear and cold, "You can never escape." I turned to run again, but I knew, deep down, that I never would. They were always watching. Always waiting. And I had been a part of it all along. I don't know how much time has passed since that day. I don't know where I am, or what's real anymore. The voices are still there, in my head, in my dreams. I hear them every night, whispering, reminding me of what I am, of what I've become. There's no escaping the zone, no escaping the Watchers. I've tried, but it's like trying to run from a nightmare. They're always there. They always will be. And now, I realize, I was never supposed to leave.
Story 5.
I knew what I was getting myself into, but money's money, right? The zone had been a treasure trove for years, and there was always something more to find. This time, I heard about a scientific complex deep in the heart of the zone, old, abandoned, untouched by time. The kind of place where secrets could be buried under layers of dust. They said there were materials, tech, old experiments left behind. Hell, it was enough to get anyone's blood pumping. The deeper I went, the thicker the air got. The sounds of the zone, those damn shrieks and groans, echoed around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The place felt off. The kind of off you get when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. The walls of the complex were rusted, twisted, and covered in some kind of strange growths. Whatever had happened here wasn't natural. It felt like the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to make the next move. But I wasn't here to feel uneasy. I was here for the big score. I pushed through the crumbling doors and into the darkness. The air inside was stale, but there was a strange coldness to it. It wasn't the kind of chill that came from being in an abandoned building for years. No, this was different. This was the kind of cold that made your bones ache. Something had happened here, something more than just the collapse of an old facility. I found what was left of the lab deeper inside. The rooms were scattered with broken equipment, overturned tables, papers with strange symbols, and faded blueprints. They'd been researching something, human biology, cells, immortality. But the files didn't make much sense. Some were torn, others completely unreadable. Whatever had gone down here, it was too horrific for them to leave anything behind. My flashlight flickered, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls, but I didn't let it stop me. I needed answers. I needed the loot. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for, a sealed chamber. The glass windows were cracked, the door half open, as if someone had tried to escape in a hurry. Inside, rows of what looked like tanks, some broken, others still functioning, lined the walls. I stepped closer, peering through the thick glass. What I saw made my stomach twist. There were bodies inside, or at least, what used to be bodies. Their skin was pale, stretched thin, their eyes open wide in a frozen stare. They were still alive, but not really. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't explain it, but there was something wrong with these bodies. They weren't just dead, they were something else. I backed away from the glass, my heart thudding in my chest. Whatever they'd been studying here, it wasn't just about immortality. It was something far worse. Something that made the air feel heavier. I rummaged through the papers I'd found earlier, trying to make sense of what had happened here. The more I read, the more I felt like I was sinking into a hole. They weren't just researching immortality. They were experimenting with cells, cells that didn't die. Cells that could regenerate, survive anything. But the tests, they weren't on animals. They were on people. Real people. The documents mentioned subjects, patients, who had been chosen for these experiments. They were supposed to become something else. I stumbled upon a file that was more detailed than the others. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. Subject 14 shows no signs of decay. However, there's been an unexpected outcome. The subject is alive but is no longer fully human. The body has undergone extreme mutations, and the mind is unstable. We believe the subject still retains consciousness, though it may no longer be in a form we can comprehend. I couldn't stop reading. It was like a car wreck. You know you should look away, but you can't. They had created something. Something that should have stayed buried in the dark. Something that wasn't human anymore. I didn't know how or why, but I could feel it deep down in my gut. I had to get out of there. Fast. As I turned to leave, something stopped me. A faint sound, almost like whispering, came from the other side of the room. I froze, heart racing. It was soft at first, just a murmur in the air. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind, maybe the building settling. But then it got louder, clearer, words. We are still here. The voice was raspy, distorted, and hollow. It sent a chill crawling up my spine. I backed up toward the door, but before I could reach it, I heard something moving. Something heavy. Slow, but deliberate. My breath caught in my throat as I turned, and there it was, one of them. It was barely recognizable as human. The skin was torn, stretched, like it had been pulled too tight. Its limbs were thin, almost skeletal, and its eyes, those eyes, were wide and empty, filled with a dark, impossible hunger. It reached out to me with one hand, dragging itself toward me with an unnatural, jerky movement. I couldn't move. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs were frozen in place. The thing, no, the creature, was close now, its breath ragged, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It wasn't trying to kill me. It wasn't even trying to hurt me. It was just studying me, watching me. And the worst part? I could hear it in my head. A voice, just like the one I'd heard on the radio earlier. "You're not leaving." I don't know how I managed to snap out of it. Maybe it was the fear. Or maybe it was the fact that I had no idea what the hell I was dealing with. But I bolted. My body finally moved, and I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but I didn't stop to look back. The whispers in my head kept growing, filling every corner of my mind. "You can't leave, you're part of us now." I found the exit eventually, but I could still hear it, feel it, those things, those twisted experiments, chasing me, their steps echoing in my mind. I stumbled out into the cold night air, gasping for breath, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The zone had never felt so alive, so aware. I could still hear them. And worse, I knew they could hear me. I thought I'd left it all behind, the creatures, the experiments. But now, every step I take feels like I'm walking closer to something I can't outrun. I never should have gone that deep into the zone. Never should have discovered what they'd left behind. But now, there's no going back. They're still out there, and they're still watching. And I can't shake the feeling that they're closer than I ever imagined. I couldn't get them out of my head. The voices, the whispers, they kept coming, no matter where I went. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining it, that it was the stress, the shock. But it was too real. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. The twisted, contorted bodies of the test subjects, their eyes locked onto mine, following me. The way they moved, like puppets, jerking and twitching with no real control. I could feel their presence, always there, lurking, waiting. At night, I would hear them in the darkness, calling to me. Sometimes it was just a voice, faint, like a memory. Other times, it was more. "Come back," they would say. "You're one of us now." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. A promise that I couldn't escape. I tried to go back to my old life, to pretend like it never happened. But the zone had changed me. There was no going back. The whispers were growing stronger, louder, like they were closing in on me. They knew I'd been there. They knew what I had seen. And now, they weren't going to let me leave. Not ever. Days turned into weeks, and I still couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. Everywhere I went, there was a shadow just behind me. A cold breeze on my neck, a flicker in the corner of my eye. The world around me felt different. Like it wasn't real anymore. Like I was stuck in the zone, even though I'd left it behind. And the whispers, they never stopped. It was getting harder to tell what was real and what was just in my head. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The whispers would be there, louder now, closer. "You belong to us," they would say. "You can't escape." I couldn't go on like this. I had to confront it, had to face whatever was following me. But every time I thought I was close, every time I felt like I might be free, I'd hear their voices again. Their cold, relentless voices. And I knew that no matter what I did, no matter how far I ran, I would never be free. The zone had claimed me. And there was no escape. I tried everything. I went back to the zone. I thought if I faced it head-on, maybe I could find some way to break the curse, to shake off the influence of those things. But when I got there, nothing was the same. The place had changed, warped by time, by whatever experiments they had done. The air was thick with something else now. A presence that wasn't human. I walked deeper into the zone, but it was like I was being led somewhere. Like I was being pulled, step by step, toward the heart of whatever madness had been created in that lab. And when I finally reached it, there it was again. That cold, empty stare. The twisted bodies. But this time, they weren't locked in tanks. They were standing, moving, waiting. And then, I saw it, the one that had been watching me all along. Its face wasn't just twisted. It was familiar. Too familiar. It was me. Or what I had become. I should have known. The whispers had been right all along. I was one of them now. I didn't have to see it to know it. The zone had taken me, changed me. My body was no longer my own. It was part of something else, part of whatever those things were. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of my own voice, whispering back at them, I can't escape. Now, I'm here, trapped in this place. I don't know if I'm alive or dead. But I can hear their voices. And they're still calling. Still waiting. And I know, deep down, that I'll never be free. Because I'm one of them now. Forever.
Story 6.
You ever hear the story about the city that was never built? I bet you haven't. It's one of those weird local legends that gets passed around by the old-timers in the nearby villages. They say it was a place, a town that was planned but never constructed, lost in the pages of history. But no one talks about it for too long. People get weird when the topic comes up, and you can see them look over their shoulder like they're afraid of something watching. I had to go see it for myself. I mean, it's a legend, right? But something about it, the way the locals get all hush-hush, made my curiosity itch. I got my gear ready, packed light, and set off towards the zone. It wasn't like I had anything to lose, and honestly, I was looking for a challenge. The zone has its usual horrors, but a ghost town? That was something else. Something I couldn't pass up. They said it was hidden, tucked away behind the anomalies, and no one had ever made it back to tell the tale. But I figured, hell, I had to try. The maps don't show it, but people who've wandered too far into the wilderness, those few who came back, claim it's real. I was going to find out the truth. I didn't know yet, but that decision would be the last one that felt right. The air was thick as soon as I stepped past the zone's outer edge. The silence was unsettling, no birds, no animals, just the quiet hum of the atmosphere itself. I knew the zone was a living, breathing thing, but this felt different. There was a kind of weight here, like the earth itself was holding its breath. I made my way deeper into the wasteland, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of the city. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, maybe a few crumbling walls or some half-formed buildings. What I found was far worse. There were ruins, all right, but they looked wrong. Like they'd been abandoned before they were even finished. Walls that didn't meet the ground, streets that led nowhere, and strange concrete structures that had no purpose. At first, I thought it was just the usual mess you get when people get spooked and run, but then I saw it, shadows. Not just any shadows, either. They didn't move like they should. They weren't cast by anything I could see, and they stretched in ways that made no sense. I could feel them around me, tugging at the edges of my vision, and something about them made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling stuck with me. It was like being watched, but no one was there. The air felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. I pushed forward, hoping to find some sign of life or maybe an abandoned shelter, but the deeper I went, the weirder things got. I heard voices next. Low murmurs at first, just barely audible over the wind. I stopped, holding my breath, trying to make sense of it. The words were soft, distorted, but I swear I heard my name. "Come closer," one of them whispered. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't help but take a step toward the sound. But when I looked around, there was nothing, just the wreckage of the city, still and silent. That's when I started to realize something. This place wasn't just empty. It was alive. There was an energy here, something pulling at me. The shadows weren't just part of the landscape, they were watching, waiting. I could feel it in my bones. And I was beginning to wonder if I had made a huge mistake coming here. The temperature dropped sharply, and I noticed my breath coming out in foggy puffs. The air felt wrong, too still, too cold for the time of year. I walked through the remains of what looked like a marketplace, stalls overturned and filled with debris. But as I stepped closer to one of the stalls, something caught my eye, a small, cracked mirror lying in the dirt. I bent down to pick it up, my reflection distorted in the shattered surface. But it wasn't just the mirror that was off. Something in the reflection didn't match. There was another figure standing beside me, something I hadn't seen when I looked around. A shadow, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat, just standing there. My heart leapt into my throat, but when I whipped around to face it, there was nothing behind me. I dropped the mirror and backed away. The chill in the air was suffocating now, and that whispering voice, so faint, so wrong, began again. "You don't belong here," it said, and for the first time, I felt a real surge of fear. This place wasn't just haunted. It was cursed, and I was already too far inside to escape. I kept walking, trying to keep it together, but the further I went, the more I noticed things shifting. The streets began to twist and curve in ways that didn't make sense. Buildings seemed to appear and disappear, like the whole place was rearranging itself. And then, I started to see them. They were people, or at least, they looked like people at first. I saw a group standing near an old fountain, motionless, staring at me with empty, hollow eyes. They didn't blink, didn't move. Just stared, like they were waiting for something, or someone. Their clothes were old, tattered, out of time with the present, but when I looked closer, I realized they weren't even real. They were just images, projections. Ghosts of the past, or perhaps something even worse. I felt my throat tighten, my stomach churn. This was it. The city that never was, the one that was never built, it wasn't abandoned. It had never left. These weren't ghosts. These were memories, trapped in time. And they weren't just memories, they were conscious, alive in some twisted, wrong way. They were aware of me. I turned to leave, but as I did, the shadows in the corners of my eyes grew longer, darker. The whispering voices grew louder, and now they were saying more than just my name. "Come to us," they urged. "We've been waiting for you." I was suffocating in the thick air, each breath harder than the last. I ran, well, more like stumbled, through the ruins, my legs heavy, my mind screaming for an escape. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. The shadows followed, shifting and twisting around me. The ground felt unstable beneath my feet, like I wasn't even on solid ground anymore. It was like the whole city had become one giant trap, and I had walked right into it. And then, just as I thought I was going to collapse from panic, I saw it. At the end of a long, dark alley, a faint light, flickering, like a distant flame. Hope surged in me. I bolted toward it, thinking it was a way out, a sign of salvation. But as I got closer, I realized something. There was no exit. The light wasn't leading to freedom. It was leading deeper into the heart of the city, where the shadows stretched so long, they seemed to swallow everything whole. I reached the light, but it was nothing like I imagined. It wasn't a flame, not a light at all. It was a doorway, framed by an arch of crumbling stone. Beyond it was darkness, nothing but thick blackness, like the space inside had never seen light. And standing just in front of it were more of those figures, more of the strange, distorted people who didn't belong. They were looking at me, silent, unmoving. Their faces. I can't even explain it. It wasn't like they were alive. It was like they were stuck, frozen in a single moment of time, trapped in their own past. But they were still here, and now they were reaching out to me, their hands twitching like they wanted something, like they needed something from me. "Step through," one of them whispered, and its voice, though faint, made my skin crawl. "You belong here with us." The air around me thickened, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I realized what they wanted. They didn't want me to leave. They wanted me to join them. To become another shadow in their endless, unending cycle. I could feel myself breaking. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. The world around me had become a nightmare, a twisted dream. Every shadow, every voice seemed to pull me deeper into this place, a place that didn't exist on any map, a place that had never existed at all. But I had to make a choice. I could either step through that doorway, let it take me, and become just another forgotten echo in this empty city, or I could fight, somehow, and leave. I wasn't sure I even could leave, but I wasn't ready to become part of whatever this place was. Not yet. I took a step back, heart pounding, and that's when the whispers turned into screams. Screams so loud they shook my bones, so sharp they nearly cut through my mind. "You can't escape," they wailed. "You are part of us now,